Now to tell us what the international desk has for us in the upcoming week, we are joined by SABC News Correspondent in New York, Sherwin Bryce-Pease. Sherwin, good afternoon. Thank you so much. Really do appreciate it. Busy past week that you've had. Of course, Trump and Putin had the summit, and now we know that Zelensky is coming. But before Zelensky goes to Washington, he has a teleconference with a number of his European allies to prepare for that. But we have a sense of what to expect, I guess, from how the Trump and Zelensky meeting will play out, given how the Trump and Putin meeting played out. What are some of the key indicators you'll be looking at this week?
Oliver, good to be with you. I think let history be our guide. Yes, President Zelensky will be making his way back to Washington, D.C. on Monday. We've just actually seen a headline that Friedrich Merz, the German Chancellor, will be joining that meeting. So you talk about the engagement with European allies. I think a recognition from the Europeans that they need to be with Zelensky every step of the way, given how that February meeting with the Ukrainian delegation in the Oval Office and the poor showing, essentially that our memory serves us well in terms of how that meeting went, right? Quite a disposition, quite a contrast to the rolling out of the red carpet you saw in Anchorage, Alaska, ahead of Donald Trump's meeting with President Putin on Friday. Let me just tell you where we find ourselves in this conversation, right? Initially, Donald Trump went into this meeting seeking to engender a ceasefire here so that they could then open up negotiations, a trilateral meeting between the three of them towards a longer peace deal. What we now understand from that, the outcome of that Friday meeting is what Donald Trump has said on Truth Social, his social media website. Let me tell you what he said. It was a great and very successful day in Alaska. The meeting with President Putin of Russia went very well, as did the late night phone calls he had with President Zelensky of Ukraine and various European leaders, including the NATO Secretary General. It was determined by all, he says, that the best way to end the horrific war between Russia and Ukraine is to go directly to a peace agreement, Oliver, which would end the war and not a mere ceasefire agreement, which oftentimes do not hold up. Remember, the intention here was always a ceasefire from Donald Trump. In fact, he had said on the record multiple times that he would be very upset were he not to get a ceasefire arrangement with President Putin. Of course, that entire framing shifted immediately after the meeting. He said that President Zelensky would be coming to the Oval Office on Monday. If all works out, we will schedule a meeting with President Putin, a trilateral meeting towards a longer-term peace deal. We also understand from Reuters reporting, Oliver, that Trump told Zelensky Ukraine should make a deal to end the war because Russia is a very big power and Ukraine is not. He told Zelensky Putin had offered to freeze most of the front lines if Kyiv ceded the territory of Donetsk, one of the industrial areas where Russia has made steady headway in terms of usurping some of Ukraine's territory. Zelensky, we understand, said no. So that already tells you that there's friction here, and we'll be watching closely on Monday to see how that meeting plays itself out. Will it be anything similar to what we saw in February when he was essentially castigated alongside various cabinet ministers and members of Donald Trump's cabinet in the Oval Office? Friedrich Merz, the German Chancellor, will be there. What sort of dynamic does that offer in terms of how we move this file forward? All eyes will be on the Oval Office on Monday afternoon.
It seems like the goalposts keep shifting for Trump when it comes to Ukraine. First is what? Sign the deal, give us a minerals concessions, and we will give you the arms backing that you need. And now it's, oh no, actually, Russia's just stronger and bigger than you. I seem to like Putin a little bit more. We're great friends. And he's not going to tell Senate all the stuff Mike Camp had asked him around the cyber espionage case that's currently being investigated by the FBI and the CIA. So maybe just give a peace deal concession, which is concede big parts and big territories and crucial territories of your country to Russia. The goalposts keep shifting here, and the European leaders seem to be aligning with Ukraine that Ukraine should not be making that sort of concession. So Ukraine's coming into this meeting with the backing of its European allies to not make that sort of concession. And that tension, we know, is the sort of thing that Trump is not able to get around. When Zelensky was apprehensive to the minerals deals that didn't have clear terms, Trump threw him out of the White House. If Zelensky is going to be unwilling to sign a peace deal where there are these concessions which make him unfavorable to Ukrainians, will Trump throw him out of the White House again?
Yeah, I mean, that certainly is a question. I imagine not. I mean, he is the president of Ukraine and he will have the German chancellor there as well. So that seems unlikely. We understand that relationships have been patched up since that Oval Office meeting. You'll remember the one-on-one, they pulled chairs
in the Vatican
together
Cathedral.
At the Vatican on the sidelines of Pope Francis's funeral. They met there. They have subsequently signed a rare earth minerals deal. So things have moved in the right direction in terms of the bilateral relationship between Washington and Kyiv. The question here comes down to what Donald Trump has been putting on the table in terms of territorial swaps. What Zelensky has said is that in terms of the Ukrainian constitution, we cannot give our land away. And if you listen to various interlocutors out of Ukraine, they make the case that this is not just about giving Russia territory. There are Ukrainians that live there. We are fighting to protect those Ukrainians. To then cede that territory to Russia would not just be ceding land, you would also then be ceding the people that live there. And in terms of the Ukrainian constitution, Oliver, you cannot just give the land away. There would have to be a constitutional amendment for that to happen. So there's a very high bar in terms of what the Ukrainians can do when it comes down to territorial swaps. They've been fighting here for over 3 years. They've lost a number of lives, over 1 million casualties, we understand, in terms of estimates on both sides, in terms of the numbers that have been lost and the number of people that have been injured. So a very high, a high price has been paid here in terms of, this fight that we've seen here. So I think the Ukrainians are very clear that they want a pause in fighting so that they can talk about other issues. They cannot just go to a peace deal. They want a ceasefire. They want the killing to stop so that they can talk about the more granular, more substantive issues about where we go here. Look, there are going to be compromises, right? They're going to have to be compromises from both sides here. The question is, what format does that take? What sort of security guarantees can Ukraine get? Do the Europeans just provide that backstop, or does the United States play a bigger role in terms of Ukraine's future security? Does that then factor into a deal? If the US says, yes, we'll back you, what are you going to give us in terms of making a deal with Putin here? These are some of the questions we might get clarity on in the days ahead, Oliver.
Speaking of territorial integrity, let's go to Israel, where it seems Bibi Netanyahu has decided to cement the settlement encroachment in Palestinian territories.
Yeah, that's territorial integrity. We can talk about that in Sudan. We can talk about it in Gaza. We can talk about it in Ukraine. All of these things are violations of some of the sacrosanct tenets of the United Nations Charter and of international law. Let me tell you what the Secretary General has said, right? This is in the context of the Finance Minister of Israel, Bezalel Smotrich, saying that they plan to build 3,000 homes in a very controversial area known as E1 in the occupied West Bank, essentially, in his words, to bury the idea of a Palestinian state. Of course, this has now received a great deal of condemnation from around the world, including from the UN Secretary General. This is the statement they put out late last week, Oliver. Our position is clear. The Israeli settlements in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, and the regime associated with them have been established and are being maintained in violation of international law. Settlements further entrench the occupation, fuel tensions, and systematically erode the viability of a two-state solution and a Palestinian state. Construction of E1 area would sever the northern and southern West Bank, severely undermining the prospects for the realization of a viable contiguous, essentially when we use the word contiguous, one that is bound together by its territory and not broken up, a contiguous Palestinian state. And so the Secretary General calls on Israel to immediately halt the advancement of this process. He also recalled, Oliver, and this is a very important point, the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice that was handed out in July of 2024, essentially saying that the continued Israeli occupation of Palestinian territories is illegal, it is unlawful, and that Israel should bring its occupation to an end as soon as possible. What are the Israelis doing here? They are ignoring that ruling and expanding settlements in the area, in violation of several United Nations Security Council resolutions which are binding. And so it's going to be interesting to watch this week how the international community coalesces to ensure that the viability of a two-state solution remains front and center. Of course, there was just a two-state solution conference with a number of ministers and heads of state coming to New York at the end of July. And of course, you're going to see a number of countries, France, the United Kingdom, Canada, and other Western nations that have signaled that they are going to formally recognize a Palestinian state at the UN General Assembly in September. So interesting to see how this plays out in the days ahead.
Just one more specificity of that 2024 ICJ judgment on the continued settlement. Was it very specifically on Israeli settlements in Gaza, or was it in all Palestinian territories?
In all Palestinian territories. The occupation of Palestinian territories in terms of the borders of 1967. Israel has been advised essentially by the ICJ. Remember, this was an advisory opinion. But this is the judicial organ of the United Nations, and so member states tend to be bound by the prescripts of those decisions. But Israel has been urged to end its occupation of all Palestinian territories and withdraw from these territories as soon as possible. We have seen no indication that that has been implemented. We've also not seen any indication that Israel, to a large extent, has implemented the provisional measures handed down by that very same ICJ in terms of the genocide case brought by South Africa against the state of Israel in terms of its conduct, the military conduct of its war in Gaza. So we see a lot of impunity here in terms of ignoring judgments from the ICJ. One wonders how long that can go on and what the response from the international community will be.
Very quickly, 2 minutes left. What's happening in Sudan? What's on your diary?
You know, it's important that we talk about Sudan, right, in the context of Ukraine, in the context of what's happening to Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank. Sudan is not getting the requisite attention that it deserves, Oliver. It is the largest humanitarian situation, crisis in the world. 24 to 30 million people are in need of humanitarian aid. And if you listen to what the United Nations has said this week, a year ago, famine was confirmed in the Zamzam internally displaced refugee camp, which is about 15 kilometers south of Al-Fasher. Al-Fasher is the capital of North Darfur. Darfur, of course, a long history in terms of genocide in the early 2000s. And so this is a region that is really being impugned again by the ongoing war here between the RSF, the Rapid Support Forces, and Sudan's armed forces. The UN says a year ago, famine was confirmed in the Zamzam camp, which is near Al-Fasher. Currently, 17 areas have been classified at risk of famine, including parts of Darfur, the Nuba Mountains, Khartoum, and Gezira. The UN says the situation is only getting worse, Oliver. The World Food Programme last week was pressing authorities to allow humanitarian access to Al-Fasher. Al-Fasher, you might recall, has been under siege from the Rapid Support Forces. So humanitarian aid has essentially not been getting to that region. And so the concerns around starvation here are very palpable. We also saw last week members of the UN Security Council put out a consensus-driven statement rejecting the establishment of a parallel government by the RSF in areas that it controls. It expressed concern that the actions pose a threat to Sudan's territorial integrity and unity and further risk exacerbating the ongoing conflict. So there is a dire situation playing out in Sudan. It's difficult for us to tell you who exactly is leading that process to bring the parties together again. You know, the Saudis led on this, the United States at one point, but things continue to break down. You see parallel governments being formed, and it does beg the question, right? African solutions for African problems. I know the AU has been very much involved. We know that IGAD has been very much involved, but we have not seen a requisite arresting of the situation that continues to deteriorate. So questions need to be asked in terms of the AU mission, in terms of silencing the guns. That does not seem to be the case here in Sudan.
Yeah. Sherwin, thank you so much for that. Really do appreciate it, and all the best for the week. Sherwin Bryce-Pease giving us an update of what his diary contains for the week ahead.